The first time we went on a family vacation to Hawaii, I remember my grandmother telling my siblings and me about a wave we had to be careful of. It was called a sneaker wave that came up from seemingly nowhere and swept you away, submerging you in water and dragging you out to sea with its strong currents. Because of these waves, we had to wear floaties on the beach, and we weren't allowed to ever turn our back to the ocean. It was my grandmother's way of trying to control, or at least prevent the path of nature. However, I knew that if one of these waves took me, I would be helpless under its power. It was a natural force, and human beings never win against natural forces. For much of my life, I assumed that these waves, these forces of nature, existed only in the ocean. While they worried me, I believed that they were contained, and I could, to some extent, control them. I believed that if I stayed away from these waves and took the necessary precautions to protect myself, I could control the outcome of my safety. As I grew up, however, I came to the understanding that these waves do not only exist on the beach or in the ocean, but can be found in terrestrial forms, emotions in our body. These waves come at you out of nowhere and hit you with their might, knocking you down and taking you away from the life you know. My favorite time of year at Deerfield Academy is the fall. The campus and its surrounding hills look like they're on fire with the brilliant red, yellows, and oranges produced from the changing leaves. This picturesque campus was my home for 4 years, and I embraced and loved almost every element of it. To me, it was the perfect school. However, despite my love for Deerfield, I had to come to the hard realization that this campus was not a haven for all of its students. When my older sister Molly stepped onto the campus, something hit a nerve with her. While Molly was 2 years older than me, she followed me to Deerfield because she saw how I thrived in the community's environment. But her strong personality and sometimes stubborn unwillingness to adapt to change that had helped her forge the path for my brother and I to follow in hindered her integration into the Deerfield community. She didn't willingly want to adapt to Deerfield's ways of life because she recognized the flaws that I couldn't see. She offered a fresh set of eyes and a new perspective on the community. She soon began to realize that her large public school from home was vastly different from this small, private boarding school. One day, when I was walking around campus, I found my sister sitting on a bench, alone, a look of defeat around her. I squatted on the ground to get at her level, putting my hand on her back in an effort to comfort her. She wasn't crying, but I could tell she had been. I had never seen my older sister in such a state of complete despair. Instinctively, I wanted to protect her from the hurt she was feeling and solve the problems for her. This was what I liked to do: protect, control, and solve the problems I saw in the people's lives that I cared about. I got her off the bench and took her for a walk, hoping that it would help her clear her mind. But even on the walk, she couldn't explain why she was so upset. I tried to understand her point of view, tried to listen to her, see what it was like from an outsider's perspective so I could fix this mess for her, try to make her happy again. But I couldn't. It was as if her body was completely rejecting Deerfield and essentially shutting down, almost like an allergic reaction. A sneaker wave of complete sadness had engulfed her, and I could not bring her back to shore. I could not fix it. I could not throw her a pair of floaties that would solve everything. I needed help in order to help her, to understand what this engulfing sadness meant. While I didn't know these terms at the moment, I simply did not have the power to send more serotonin to her brain, to balance the chemicals in her body that would make her happy again. Deerfield was simply not the place for her, and whether or not I could understand it in the moment, I had to let her go. Molly left school on medical leave 2 months later, on December 3rd, my birthday. On this leave, she was diagnosed with depression. After this leave, she decided not to come back to Deerfield. When I first saw Wake's campus, I was amazed by how similar it looked to Deerfield. It had grand brick buildings, pristine lawns, and friendly students walking around. It was almost as if Deerfield grew 8 times bigger and moved to North Carolina. I naively believed that because the schools aesthetically looked alike, I would have similar experiences. I thought I would be able to easily find my friends, find classes I loved, teachers I connected with, and a student body whose mission was to better themselves through academics. The first few weeks of Wake went by, and I felt a sense of homesickness coming on. I called my mom crying, telling her I wanted to go home. I wasn't sure if home was Deerfield or my home in California, but all I knew is that Wake wasn't clicking. I couldn't put my finger on what was different, but I felt lost and overwhelmed by my desire to fit into this foreign environment. In an effort to control aspects of my life, to break them into manageable pieces, I tried to first focus on making friends. However, that was slow coming, and I felt disconnected between my own goals and those of my classmates. Socializing and trying to make friends in a frat basement was not where I thrived, but it seemed that was where all my peers wanted to go. Even when I thought about rallying and trying to go out to have fun, the anticipated smell of beer, cigarettes, urine, and vomit that I would face upon entering the frat house made me nauseous to think about. I had never experienced such high alcohol consumption and reckless behavior in one setting. I was shocked. I began to dread going along with them, going to parties where I felt like I was the only one not having fun. This made me feel socially isolated and alone. This dread turned into anxiety, as I could not control the scene of a party. At times I became so anxious anticipating the upcoming weekend, I would not eat for days leading up to Friday. This feeling of isolation, loneliness, and anxiety began acting like a wave, slowly overtaking my body and then pulling me in all at once. Before I knew it, all I wanted to do was be in my bed, where I felt safe and secure. I would get these anxiety attacks of sadness, where I felt like I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, and I couldn't think of anything but my unhappiness. I would call my mom inconsolable. It was as if my mind was in a fog and clouded over. Admitting how I felt to my parents and close friends took time and courage. I always viewed myself as the girl who didn't have problems herself, but was able to solve problems for other people. I liked to have control over my own life, and this sadness was something I could not control. After my first attack of sadness, I thought it would be the last, but multiple waves seemed to keep hitting me, just like waves follow each other at the beach on the shore. Just as one hits, another one comes in. They kept knocking me down, weakening me. With each pummel, the next knock became easier, until I was beholden to the waves taking me down and out to sea. I felt like I was drowning. The sneaker wave had finally caught up to me, and I was completely powerless under its immense pressure. In the beginning of November, after I called my mom crying one night, I had reached the apex of my unhappiness. I could feel the current pulling me out to sea, and I was drowning in desolation. The next day, the doctor diagnosed me with depression. After talking with my therapist, I recently learned that the body reacts to emotional and physical pain in the same way. As humans, we crave a deep connection to those around us, so much so that some people compare this need to the biological necessity of food, water, and shelter. When we don't feel this connection, this sense of community, our body reacts, shutting down and preserving energy. I've learned that this reaction is the work of the sneaker wave. While I thought the sneaker wave was completely sadness caused by a chemical imbalance of serotonin in our brain, it comes in two parts. The first waves are sadness, but the second part, or its current, is protection. Your body safeguards you by numbing your rational thought, defending your body against the outside world and submerging you until you are sinking, being dragged out to sea. You fight the waves at first. You fight the feeling of helplessness engulfing you. But when you reach a point of absolute exhaustion, you can do no more. As I watched the sneaker wave take over Molly at Deerfield, I felt helpless watching this depression and sadness engulf her. Watching someone go through this is both physically and emotionally painful. I was able to recognize some of the symptoms develop in her, but I was not courageous enough to fully save her. The natural forces pulling Molly out to sea were stronger than her efforts to stop them. But this does not mean we can't recover from these waves. Just as nature regrows after a natural disaster, we too regrow. The regrowth takes time and strength, but it happens eventually. We have to be patient not to fight the wave after it has won, but learn to accept defeat. You have to acknowledge that you will be able to grow from the place that the wave brought you, even if it is at the rock bottom of the ocean. Just as natural forces are part of nature's cycle, so too is resilience. Each day after my diagnosis, I try to move forward in my recovery. This does not mean the waves stop coming, but I've learned that I must embrace my body's ebb and flow to its surroundings. I must trust its resilience as I work my way to grow from the sneaker wave that initially swept me away.